Welcome to CogX, and welcome to the Global Leadership Summit. And how is everybody? Well, great. Well, look, I'm very excited to be moderating this panel, very much looking at the returns of AI. I think a lot has been talked about the efficiencies and the benefits of AI, but how serious are these returns? And really staying within the theme of the festival, which is how do we get the next 10 years right? I think we're at a critical moment in time where lots of jostling will happen over the next few years that will then set the new norm for us in society. So I'm really delighted to be sort of welcoming this fantastic panel. As the person previously mentioned, we have great representation here from industry as well as from government, so both the public and private sector. And I think the reason why I'm so excited is because when you cross both the public and private sector, extreme value does get created in the right way. So we'll hear from these perspectives. So I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, starting with you, Doug, if that's okay.
Of course. Morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. I'm Doug Gurr. I'm here in my capacity as chair of the Alan Turing Institute, our National Data Science and AI Institute. And in former life, I did a little bit of work in business. I ran Amazon's businesses here in the UK. And prior to that, I ran Amazon in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Alex.
I'm the CEO of Wayve. Wayve, we're building embodied AI technology, so AI models that can physically interact with the world. And one of the applications we're focused on first is autonomous driving. Autonomous driving is going to have a transformative effect on the way we move people and goods around cities. And we've been testing our AI models on UK roads for the last 5 or 6 years. We have them in grocery trials, doing delivery with our partners Asda and Ocado, and are really excited to be seeing the impact that AI can have in this space.
Terrific. Thank you, Alex. And Robyn.
Good morning. I'm Robyn Scott. I'm co-founder and CEO of Apolitical, which is a global network and learning platform for governments. We're used by more than 200,000 verified public servants and policymakers in 160 different countries. And we're doing a lot of work right now on AI in the form of a government AI campus that we've just launched.
Terrific. Well, look, I think, Robyn, you'd be the perfect person to start off with this panel, given that we saw Sarah give a fantastic speech about what government thinks of AI and what it's doing in that space. But Robyn, how serious are the returns from AI to governments and us as consumers? Why should we care so much?
So they are serious. That's the first point. And had you asked me this question maybe 2 months ago, I would have given a different answer. I would have pointed mostly to more efficient governments and civil services, which is, of course, a return to the taxpayer, a return to citizens, to better citizen engagement, and to the revenue from additional productivity. I mean, Goldman Sachs has put it potentially up to 7% of GDP, which is...
Per year?
Yeah, which is huge for, obviously, public finances. But I've changed my view recently, having spoken to a lot of government officials in the last few months, and heard how they're dealing with AI. And I actually think indirect returns might be bigger. And those returns are the change in the way government needs to function to work in the age of AI. Now, COVID started this. COVID made government be more agile, be more digital. And the public servants we spoke to about this were thrilled. They all wanted it to stay, but that's receded. AI is not going to recede, and it's making governments be more agile, be more proactive, have a more discursive relationship with the private sector rather than a kind of oppositional one or a total Luddite relationship. And I actually think that is a huge dividend to society in the 21st century, because right now we don't have the governments we really need, and AI is going to force them to modernize and get up to speed much faster than they would have otherwise.
So when you say dividends for the citizen, you mean the delivery of the services that we obviously use today?
Yeah.
And how else, I guess we'll come into industry, Alex, in a second, but how else? I mean, that's obviously a monetary, well, it's just cutting costs of managing the back end of government. Anything else?
Well, we need governments that meet citizens, that meet people where they are. Right now, governments often don't. Right? So citizen services, better citizen services, is a great example of that. There are numerous deployments of AI already. Estonia's long been a leader in the form of chatbots, for example. But there are many other potential use cases. I was just hearing last night, talking to someone who'd worked with the government to improve the deployment of scarcely available helicopters in the Coast Guard, and with squeezed public finances. Obviously, you have to think really carefully about where you locate a helicopter. AI managed to massively optimize that process. If any of you are caught at sea, you will be very grateful for that.
Wow.
It's a kind of trivial example, but
no, it's a very good example.
It's indicative.
Actually. Yes, that's terrific. And I love the fact that people are changing their minds, because I think there's so much we don't know, and there's so much that we don't know what we don't know, frankly. Alex, industry, the other side, I call it the market, so to speak. How serious are these returns for us as consumers, I guess?
My take on AI is there's no doubt it's going to be transformative. I think when you think about the general purpose AI, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about it. Quite frankly, we've got a lot more research to do to be able to unlock that kind of capability, and there's a lot of uncertainty with how best to regulate that kind of technology. But in specific verticals, I think we are already and are going to see tremendous impact. So where we work in autonomous driving, I can talk about some of the impacts that it will bring, but just to list off a few stats, some which might be you might expect, and some might be surprising. Of course, 1.3 million people lose their lives around the world each year due to road accidents. Orders of magnitude more get seriously injured. I think AI technology can drive that down to zero. Road accidents actually cost the UK 2% of their GDP due to all of the associated costs due to that, and there's a huge benefit possible through this technology. Even take things like car parking. 10 times the size of Hyde Park is taken up by car parks throughout London. And cars are utilised on average about 3 to 4% of the time. Most of the time they sit idle and parked. So with AI, we can make a much more sustainable and efficient transportation system in autonomous driving as a specific example. But that's not the only one. Of course, healthcare, education, co-pilots and chatbots, there are many such examples. Maybe the embodied AI aspect of it isn't talked about enough. We do live in a physical world, and I think while everyone's focusing on the chatbots and co-pilots today, I think in a decade's time, if you ask a member of the public what they think of AI, they're not going to think of their chatbot or co-pilot. They're going to think of that bipedal robot in their living room helping with their domestic tasks, or the autonomous vehicle that just dropped off their groceries or drove them to where they want to go. I think that is going to be absolutely terrific.
I mean, given the fact that you're the founder and CEO of Wayve, which is an autonomous electrical vehicle software business, it's interesting what you say about the fact, do you believe, though, as a result of your company's existence and the industry around you, there'll be fewer accidents on the roads because of AI?
It's well documented that, and unfortunately, most of us will know some really tragic experiences on the road. And I think, what is the stat that I was told? Actually, so I'm from New Zealand, and a friend at the New Zealand police told me in New Zealand, I think it's probably similar for the UK, but 99.6% of accidents are because of human error. Now, if you think about what autonomous vehicles can bring, they see 360 degrees around them simultaneously, make decisions over 10 times a second. Even those capabilities alone are far superior to what we're able to do as humans. Already, I think there's an opportunity to really improve road safety through autonomy.
Wow, so you're saying that not only are they more intelligent, but they're even more consciously aware of their surroundings than a human could possibly be, hence reducing the number of accidents.
But one of the interesting things is that people in autonomous driving believe that perfect perception equals perfect driving. It was all about seeing things. What we've really learned over the last couple of years is it's actually a decision-making problem. It's a really complex, the reason why that we don't let 5-year-olds have a driving license, even though they can see and recognize what a car or a traffic light is perfectly, it's not until you're an adult, because you have to develop the risk assessment, the judgment, these kind of things. And one of the things we're learning is there's no better technology to develop robust and performant decision-making than AI. And so I think the inflection and rise in capabilities we're seeing in AI technology this year and just recently is going to be what unlocks an application like autonomous driving at scale.
Terrific. And we'll come back to a big announcement that you have, Alex, in a second. Doug, we've heard more about the government side and the public sector, we like to call it, the private sector. Doug, given your role and given your past experience, especially as the former CEO of Amazon UK, and now what you're doing at the Natural History Museum and the Alan Turing Institute, which is doing phenomenal work in the space of AI and has been for the last decade, why should we care this time around about AI? Why?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and love the examples we had here.
Yes.
Look, I always think it's helpful to look back to history. It's not a perfect guide, but we have been here before. And if you look at the history, roughly every 100 years for the last 3 centuries, we've seen a transformative technology come along that has changed the world. So in the 18th century, we had the move from craft to mass manufacture. In the late 19th century, we had Maxwell's work, the introduction of electromagnetism that led to the telegraph, the radio, all of these things we take for granted
Communication,
today.
yes.
Yep, absolutely, all of that stuff. And then in the 20s and 30s, the 1920s and 30s, we had the move from classical science that the Greeks would have recognized, Newton would have recognized, to modern science, when you had Gödel's uncertainty principle, quantum mechanics, relativity. These are all quite recent innovations. And on each of those occasions, you had a transformative technology that changed the world. And when the dust settled, which typically took 25 to 30 years, a generation, when the dust settled, 2 things were true. First of all, the world GDP had taken a massive positive step change. Global wealth increased by a huge step change on each of these occasions. And secondly, and this is a really important point, not as much talked about, the distribution of wealth hugely improved. So if you just take the world before each of those changes, it was a much better world afterwards. The world was wealthier, there was more money for health, for education, for medicine, and it was better distributed. So you can make a very strong, compelling case that we've been in a much better place from this. Now, when we come to write the history of the late 20th, earlier 21st century, I'm pretty convinced, as I suspect all of us are, that we'll come to see informatics, computation, AI as being at least as significant a transformative technology of any of those previous 3. So we are, if you like, as people have said, clearly now round about the middle of the 4th Industrial Revolution. So that's great. And I'm very, very confident this will play out in the same way as the last 3, which is, for all the reasons you've heard, 10, 15 years from now, the world will be more productive, wealth would have increased, it'll be better distributed, it'll be a better place. That's fantastic. And that's the game we should all play for. But there's a really important but, which is in each of those previous occasions, it took an entire generation. And that caused massive social upheaval because all the jobs people have been trained for disappeared overnight. And it wasn't until the next generation came through and were kind of born mass manufacturing, born in a world of electronics, born digital, that actually they were able to pick up the skills we needed for a future world. And if you want a really practical example, Alex has just given us the most compelling argument for why, fast forward, whether it takes 10 or 15 or 20 years, the world will be in a better place because transportation will be primarily autonomous vehicles. It will be significantly safer. That will save so many lives around the world, so much maim, so much harm. It'll be much more productive. There'll be more income. Governments will tax some of that. Wealth will be distributed. So we'll be in a much better place. But I'm a lorry driver. This feels, you're taking my job. And that's where we were with the Luddites. That's where we were with each of the industrial revolutions. And if you don't address that question, we will repeat the mistake we made in the previous 3 industrial revolutions of massive social upheaval and a massive uphill battle. And my genuine concern, having been in this space for way too long, is that, look, we were saying this 15 years ago, and I think we are way behind the curve in terms of dealing with the social acceptability of these technologies. We're behind the curve in terms of the jobs transition, and we're behind the curve in terms of trust, which I think you'll talk to us about, and all of these issues. And if we don't crack that, we could actually hit a brick wall, and rather than 1 generation, it might take 2.
I was feeling great, Doug, as you were talking about the compelling argument for AI until you then said that. But I think, okay, so if that's what you've seen and witnessed multiple times, then how do we...
To be clear, I wasn't around 300 years ago. But
no, of
that's
course.
right.
But how do we address it in that case? Is it because, and I presume that in the past it wasn't really addressed either, and therefore we have... I mean, even the word Luddite, I don't think... I mean, quite a big part of society would come under that category. I don't like the word. It's quite discriminating, if I'm honest. We need to bring everybody with us,
we absolutely do, and I do think we do have the opportunity. We have the benefit of learning from history, and we have the opportunity not to repeat the mistakes. And I think the big difference now is that one of those transformations that technology has wrought is we are much better able to communicate and scale now. So that in the work that Robyn and teams do with looking at, for example, what is the role of government, clearly what you need to do is intervene earlier to say to people, well, actually, how do we equip you with the skills that you need to be able to be effective in a new world? And the good news, genuinely good news, is that on the whole, and we saw this hugely in Amazon, for example, on the whole, the stuff that robots and computers are good at is actually the rather dull, boring, dangerous stuff, you know? And actually, if you do your job well, you can say the good news is, Mr. Lorry driver, Mr. Bus driver, Mr. Asda or Ocado driver, you don't have to do that job. We can actually lift you up. And if you look at the very best applications, it's where we've been able to use the technology to augment human capability. So that, I'm going to give you a really simple example from the Natural History Museum. We spend a lot of time trying to work out how you date dinosaur bones. Sounds like quite a weird use case, but it's a really important one. And the way you date dinosaur fossils, because they spread over 200 million years, is you look at the substrates and you take tiny samples from the substrate, you smear it on a microscope slide, you stare through it with a microscope and you discover these nanofossils, pollens, planktons, tiny microscopic nanofossils that are very, very abundant, and they change quite significantly over the time period. So the way you do it is you take a highly trained postdoc, let's call him Tom, because that actually is his name, who spends his life staring down a microscope, looking at funny little shapes and saying, that's one of these, that's one of those. And if he does 2,000 of these, which takes him about 10 days of staring down a microscope, 8 hours a day, he can date a dinosaur fossil, which is awesome. But then we put him together with a Turing Institute researcher and said, well, this sounds like a computer vision problem. Rather than you physically doing all of that, why don't you train a machine to do it on your behalf? 3 months later, they're now dating dinosaur fossils 45,000 times faster with a 97.5% fidelity. Better job. Humans got a job. Computers got a job. We end up in a better place.
And he's happier.
Yeah, he's very happy. We just need to scale that, which is where Robyn comes in.
Exactly. So Robyn, I think you wanted to come in and talk more about this.
So two quick things. First, I think there's a dark side and a light side to this application, clearly. And I'll just mention one example that really illustrates that. The Dutch had a scheme detecting benefit fraud. I think it was launched in about sort of 20 years ago. And it took benefits incorrectly away from a number of low-income families, and it eventually resulted in a whole... a big scandal, but the astonishing thing was it took 16 years to address it. So that's what has to change. There will be these instances of it going wrong, but we have to build more capability around addressing them faster. But then the flip side of that was there's now an initiative coming out of Italy looking at, can you actually use AI to prompt people to claim benefits they didn't know they had? So it's really, nothing's deterministic here. We have a lot of choice. And then just on government approaches and picking up on the disruption to the job market, it's really interesting to see how different governments are engaging with this new age of AI. And everyone's taking it seriously, which I think is a really important thing, because that hasn't been the case with other technological breakthroughs. But the strategies vary a lot. I mean, you could potentially characterize the UK's as power-led. You know, it's hosting this big AI summit later in the year. It's influence and power. Not to say it isn't doing other things, but that's sort of the masthead. In Singapore, they have or are training, I think, around 90,000 civil servants. So there's this kind of competence-led. Let's make sure we can do this well. But Australia is consultation-led. They're doing a massive public consultation where they're reaching out to the public, asking them what they're afraid of and where they see the opportunities. And I think that consultation needs to be a strand of every government's approach.
And I get that, and obviously we see that a lot of money goes into R&D of AI. So the government pump primes a lot of the R&D that we see, either through university research or otherwise, and and the amount of money spent by Amazon and the big companies is quite significant. It's significantly more than most governments put together, frankly. But Robyn, would it be fair to say that the government or any government anywhere around the world are getting this balance right? Are they putting enough money into reskilling and upskilling? Because I think the returns could be much greater if you're bringing everybody with you and embracing this change and not fearing it as a society, potentially. What do you think?
No, I think it's too early to say, because I don't think we know exactly the way that the reskilling need is going to unfold. So one theory is that if your job is, I think this was also noted in this excellent Goldman Sachs report that looked at the 7% GDP increase, but if your job is kind of under 50% affected by AI, it probably lends itself to enhancement. Suddenly, kind of you get superpowers as a worker, professional. If it's more than 50%, it's going away. And we have some sense, but we don't have a clear sense of what those are. One estimate says that I think 2/3 of US jobs, for example, are subject to some kind of disruption, but we don't know if they fall into category A, enhancement, or category B, going away. So how do governments prepare for that? They have to watch, they have to understand, they have to be in conversations with industry where these jobs are ebbing and flowing. And I really think it's too soon to call on that one.
Thank you. AI adoption, I mean, Alex, you're keen to make sure that people feel safe, people feel they can trust these systems. Tell us more, because obviously you've got a big announcement that you're making today. It was in the Financial Times today. Really excited for you, because you're a UK company, started out in Cambridge, you're from New Zealand. It's a fantastic story. You've raised over $200 million, I believe, for your company. And adoption is everything, and trust is everything in these systems. Tell us a little bit more about the announcement.
One of the things people have commented on for many years is that AI systems are hard to understand, hard to trust. And we've been working on this for many years. We're excited today to be launching Lingo 1. It's a new AI model that combines vision, language, and action in a new way for the first time. What that means is that this model understands video, it understands action, decision-making, as in driving our car, as well as language, and we can converse with it. The result is an AI model that can both drive our car and drive through the busy streets of London, safely navigating around vulnerable road users like cyclists and pedestrians, and obeying road rules and these kind of things that we should expect. But also, not only does it do that, it has the ability for us to be able to talk to it and say, why did you do what you do? What are you going to do next? What do you think? What are the hazards in front of you? And if you have any questions about what the system is doing, I think this is, we see it as a beachhead piece of research that opens up a wealth of new opportunities, particularly in AI safety and transparency, because we can now directly ask the system why it's doing what it's doing. We can understand, and where we want to take this is an ability to better align the decisions that are being made and to be able to influence them depending on the specific use case we're deploying the embodied AI technology in. I'll give you one example. It's quite interesting to ask it what hazards were in front of it when we were going down a driving scene in North London. And Lingo commented how there was a row of parked cars and it was watching out for the row of parked cars. And I thought, that's interesting. They just park cars. They're not really going to be interacting with us. Why are you concerned about that? And so I asked Lingo, why? Why are you concerned about those parked cars on your left? And Lingo said to me, because there's a chance that a pedestrian might step out from between them, might step out unexpectedly. I should be cautious about that. And so it was really neat to see that Lingo was capable of reasoning about risks that maybe weren't immediately obvious to me.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alex, and I wish you all the best with that. Doug, I'm going to come back on a comment you made about when we look back on industrial revolutions, that two things have happened, that there's an increase in GDP, which is in line with the Goldman Sachs report, and that wealth is more equally distributed. Politically, and I could be wrong here, we're hearing more and more especially from the States, that this will be the first time that the next generation will be poorer than the current generation. How does that configure? How does that, how do you see that?
Look, it's a really good point. And my comment about better distribution, that is what we saw in the past. It isn't clear that that's a given for how it will play out, except that you have to ask, what is that mechanism for redistribution?
Yes.
And I think there are two potential mechanisms for redistribution. One of which is just the very natural mechanism that, in the nicest possible way, and again I use this expression, when the dust has settled, because I think I am quite concerned about that transitional period, and I think all the work that Robyn and Alex have talked about is really important on this. But when the dust has settled, workers have become more valuable. Actually, employment has gone up, jobs have become up, values have gone up. And that is just, it's basic economics, bargaining power increases, you've had to pay for more, you had to persuade people, for example, to move from the farms to the cities and all of these things. So there was just a natural flow in which the balance of power between employer and employee led to a redistribution of wealth. So that will probably play out in the same way. We clearly see it when scarce areas. I'm sure you have to pay a lot for good software engineers and AI folk, as we all do. So you're seeing that in a bit. But does it flow down? It doesn't flow down until everybody's in jobs that actually create that. And that's where I do think you have to come back to, and again, without wanting to get too sort of geopolitical about it, what is the role of government here? And in a sense, models, at the most basic level, it's pretty straightforward. You've got commercial organizations whose job it is to create wealth. Fantastic companies like Robyn and Alex run that are the best places to actually generate wealth. It's the role of governments to try and decide what is an acceptable level of tax take, and then the stuff of politics tends to be an argument about distribution, because there are certain what you might call, there are market failures that the market will not provide. The market will not build infrastructure for you. It won't put a broadband network. It won't build roads. It won't build hospitals. It won't build schools at the scales you need them. So there is always that debate about that. And part of that then becomes bluntly a political question about distribution. And so have people got poorer? Some subsets of some parts of some countries have clearly got poorer over the last 25 years. But if you take a global view, no, distribution has improved massively over the last 25 years. China's always a good bellwether. China, for all we can feel, whatever we feel about the politics, the reality is China, and I had the opportunity to spend many years there, has lifted over 200 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years. That's completely unprecedented in global history. So actually, I think you are seeing that distribution. And ultimately, the market will get you there.
That's really fascinating. And we only have two and a bit minutes left. So I'm going to sort of build on what Doug's just talked about, which is, how soon can we see these returns? Is it a question of 5 years? Is it a question of 10 years? Or is it a whole generation? Because it takes a whole generation to adopt new products. Mobile took, from 10% to 89% penetration took over 21 years. Robyn, I'll leave you with that question, 1 minute each.
I mean, it's not going to be a step change. It's going to increase over time. And I just want to finish with this point that we're thinking about within country distribution and Gini coefficients, but we've also got to think about global distribution. And no one knows yet what it's going to do to places like Africa, already in some ways behind technologically, in some ways ahead on mobile, etc. But I think those distributional questions could lead to geopolitical conflict and challenges, and we mustn't forget those.
But there could be positive dividends.
There could be positive dividends, but we need to be thinking about them now, and we need to be approaching it in a multilateral way.
That's great. Alex.
Gerard, you said 21 years for mobile. I actually think that's fast. You compare that to the Industrial Revolution, that was about 90 years, and 21 years is within one person's work lifespan, within their career. So I think we will see AI, if the clock starts now, I think we'll see a similar adoption of that time frame or faster. It's happening, and the things that we are seeing that this technology is capable of are extraordinary. So I'm really excited to see continued innovation, adoption, but of course there are some really important problems that we need to address in order to realize the impact of it broadly.
And driverless cars are now pretty much quite common in San Francisco and So, I mean, we're seeing that benefit already now, I guess, to some extent, or would you say it's...
Well, that's why I think it's maybe fair to say the clock starts now, because we're seeing the first very small slithers of adoption, but they're in affluent areas where the cities are mapped, and you've got good infrastructure, and I think in order to bring these more broadly, it's going to be an AI solution that allows it to do it, to bring it to cities like London and others. I think that step change is what we're currently seeing in the industry.
Doug, leave us with a note of good hope.
Yeah, no, look, the note of good hope is, on the time frame,
Yes.
the key thing to remember is this is exponential, not linear. So the last bit, linear gradually gets there.
Yes.
Exponential, it goes from being really small to bang very quickly in the last bit. And if I can go back to a note of hope, and also bring it back a little bit more parochially to the UK, if I may, our namesake, Alan Turing, published the theoretical paper on computable numbers and an application to the Einschulungs problem that first postulated the concept of a universal machine in 1937. Another 12 years, the first functioning, working digital computer was produced in Manchester, in the UK. So the UK's had a long tradition of this. And actually, it's bubbled quite recently. The term computer was coined in the 1950s to refer to a human being who did calculations, not a machine. And yet, so it goes very slowly. Some of us who've been in this game for far too long could argue that a lot of this stuff has been around 15, 20 years, but at a very low level. So I think what you are now seeing is that tail end of the exponential curve in which you go from your 10% adoption to 80% adoption very, very fast. So I think a lot of these things we're talking about, my personal view is I think they've gone from being quite small niche to ubiquitous, and I think we could be surprised at just how fast that is, and the democratization of these technologies. And that'll be a good thing.
I'm looking forward to that.
It's 45% in government already using generative AI.
Yeah. That is a very good statistic to end the actual panel on. I don't know about you, but I feel so much more actually elated and excited about the future than ever before. And I really want to please join me in thanking the distinguished panel here today. Doug, Alex, Robyn, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great. Thank you.